So I reached 1,000 subscribers a couple weeks ago, and to celebrate, I decided to do a video where I answer questions from some of those 1,000 subscribers. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Question number 1. Without bringing up religious views, how would you answer the problem of evil? Now, this is a great question, because, for one thing, the problem of evil is probably the foremost objection to the existence of God historically. And second, because, sometimes Christians' responses to the problem of evil can drift a bit in the theological direction, which isn't really super helpful for people who don't already believe that God exists. So taking a more philosophical approach can definitely be needed. And there is actually a really good philosophical response to the problem of evil that goes all the way back to Thomas Aquinas and Augustine and even before that. And that's what I'm hoping to give right now. Now, in order to really understand that response, we have to really get at the heart of what the force of the problem of evil is. This problem basically says that there's a contradiction between two attributes of God and what we see about the world. The contradiction being between God being all good, God being all powerful, and the existence of evil. After all, if God is all good, and he is, according to Christians, then he should want to create a world which is only good, like himself. It's all good, and it doesn't have any evil in it. But if God's all powerful, he should have the power to create a world like that. So the fact that he hasn't, and we know he hasn't because there's evil in the world, seems to show that either God's not all good or God's not all powerful. And if that's the case, then there's real problems with the classical Christian conception of God. Now, what I would say is that in order to really understand the problem with this problem, we need to clarify two of our terms. Those terms being what it means for God to be all-powerful and what it means for God to be all good. We have to clear up what it means for something to be all good and all-powerful. Let's take all-powerful first. What does it mean when we say that God is all-powerful? I think a lot of people just assume that means that God can do anything, right? An all-powerful being can do anything out there. But that's not quite what it means. Really, what it means when we say that God is all-powerful is that God can do anything that's not a logical contradiction. Some things are just logical contradictions. They're absurdities. And God can't do things that are absurd. For example, God can't create a married bachelor. Why? Well, because a bachelor is just someone who's not married. God can't create a married, unmarried guy. That doesn't make any sense. Or he can't create a circle that has corners, a square circle, because to do that would just break the definition of a circle. A circle is by definition something that is perfectly round and doesn't have any corners. Or to take the classic example, God cannot create a rock which is so heavy that not even God could lift it up, because God, by definition, is infinitely strong. He's infinitely powerful. So a rock so heavy that he couldn't lift it up would have to be a more than infinitely heavy rock. And you can't be more than infinitely anything. So God cannot create a rock so heavy that he can't lift. God cannot create things which are logical absurdities, that are just contradiction in terms. And that doesn't contradict his being all-powerful. So, now let's clear up the second term that I mentioned, God's being all good. What exactly does it mean to say that God is all good? Well, first, what exactly does it mean to say that anything's good? Goodness, we need to remember, isn't just like an on and off switch. I think sometimes we think of it that way. Something's either good or it's bad. But that's not exactly how it works. Some things are still good. Like you could have two good things without those things being exactly the same level of good. One thing could be more good than the other thing. Goodness comes in degrees. It's kind of like a hierarchy. If you go to your freezer and you're looking for ice cream and you only have one scoop of ice cream there, that might be good. You'll be happy with that. But wouldn't it be better? Wouldn't it be more good if there were two scoops of ice cream there? Or to take a morally charged example, if it's your mom's birthday, it might be a good thing to do to call your mom on her birthday. But it might be a better thing if you visited your mom in person and brought her flowers or something. That would be a more morally good thing than just calling her. That's not to say that either of those things is bad. That's just to say that one is more morally good than the other one. Well, why is this relevant? Well, because there's some things which are really, really up there in the goodness ontological scale that are like 10 scoops of ice cream. They're really, really good. That can only exist alongside the existence of evil. To take an obvious example, compassion. The word compassion literally means to suffer with, compassion. So you can't have compassion without suffering. You can't have compassion without passion. And there are many other really good things like that. Really, really good things that couldn't have existed if not for the existence of some evil that exists alongside them. I'm sure if you sat here for a minute and you thought through your life, I'm sure there were many times that you can think of when something bad happened to you. But in retrospect, maybe a week later, you realized, hey, that actually created some really good effect. Like there's some good thing that happened because of that bad thing that happened to me that wouldn't have happened if that bad thing hadn't happened. So putting these two things we just laid out together, the fact that there's some really good things which cannot exist unless bad things exist, and the fact that God cannot create anything which is a logical contradiction, we arrive at the conclusion that there are some things which God cannot create unless he allows evil to exist alongside those things. Not saying that God creates the evil, instead he tolerates the evil as a side effect of allowing those things to exist. Because remember, evil isn't a being in itself. It's not like there's some thing called evil out there. Like it's not like the Force in Star Wars where there's like a good side and a bad side. No, there's just good, and evil's like a privation of good. God allows a privation of good to exist in order that good things that could not exist without that evil can come to exist. Really, really ontologically good things. And that doesn't contradict either his all-goodness or his all-powerfulness, and it explains the existence of evil in the world. So that's how I would answer the problem of evil using philosophy. If you want more on this, check out my video on how Thomas Aquinas answered the problem of evil. I'll link it in the description. Now to the second question. Is being a classical theist necessary for salvation? All right, this is a good question for me because it forces me to wrestle with how important the stuff I talk about on this channel is or is not actually. And the short answer I would give is yes and no. Very helpful, I know, but that's just how it is. Let me explain what I mean. For clarification, I'm a Catholic, so I'm basically going to be giving the Catholic view on this. And the Catholic view is that classical theism is true. The Catholic Church teaches classical theism. It teaches that God is all-powerful, all-knowing. It teaches that God is perfectly simple. It basically teaches the classical Aristotelian philosophical view of God with some modifications derived from divine revelation. But it also says that it is necessary to believe those things which the Catholic Church teaches in order to be saved. So, on the surface, it looks like, yes, a belief in classical theism is necessary in order to be saved, by which we mean go to heaven and experience the beatific vision. But we need to clarify exactly what we mean by necessary to believe. First, what do we mean by belief? Is it necessary to have an explicit belief in classical theism in order to be saved? No. Is it necessary to, in other words, to philosophically understand the complex concepts at play in the term classical theism, to understand what it means to say that God is all-powerful, or that he's all-good, or that he's, for crying out loud, perfectly simple in order to be saved? No. It's nice, but there are a lot of people who just don't have the time or the intellectual chops or whatever to really grapple with what these complex philosophical notions mean. I mean, take the notion of perfect simplicity, that God is perfectly simple, that he's not composed of parts. That's really, really tough to understand. And a lot of people just aren't going to get there. And the church says that's okay. As long as you have this disposition, this attitude of saying, I accept whatever the Catholic Church means when she talks about God, then you believe in classical theism. That's an implicit belief in classical theism. But then there's the question of, is that even necessary for salvation? Can you be someone who, say, doesn't accept classical theism and in fact explicitly rejects classical theism and still be saved? And to that, I would say, yeah, it's possible. The church has always had a belief in something that she calls baptism by desire. And the concept first emerged when talking about the ancient pagans before the coming of Christ. And the question was, what happens to these pagans? Are they just damned because they had the misfortune of being born before Christ and they never heard the gospel. And what the church came to was this conclusion that no, they're not automatically damned because they never heard the gospel. They're judged based on the information that they had available to them in their lives, in what they happened to hear, and how they lived their lives based on what they were given. In the same way, we apply that to people who, live on the other side of the world and happen to live in a, say, Muslim majority country or a Hindu majority country, and they've just never really met a Christian, and maybe they've heard of Christianity or something, but they don't really understand like what Christianity is. Or even more extreme, to people who have heard what Christianity is, but they just haven't heard a compelling case for Christianity. These people could be saved. I'm not saying they will be. We don't know, but there's no contradiction there. Like the God in his mercy could judge them based on what they've been given. An example I've given before is the atheist Alex O'Connor. Alex O'Connor has said that if he found out that God existed, he would love to live his life in accordance with God's will. And to that I say, great. It seems like your not believing in God isn't a moral fault. It's an intellectual one. So when it comes to time for his judgment, it's very likely that he will be judged in accordance with the information he was given. So given what he knew, he lived the best life that he could. He sincerely thought that God did not exist. And that wasn't a moral fault. Again, he wasn't rejecting God out of malice. He was just rejecting God because he honestly just didn't think that the arguments for God worked. And from the Catholic perspective, there's a hope for salvation there. It could very well end up that atheists like Alex O'Connor make it to heaven. They die atheists, and then they see that God exists at the judgment, and they say, okay, now I know God exists. Now I promise to live eternity in accordance with God's will. And in that sense, no, a belief in classical theism is not necessary for salvation. Fancy that. And the third question, what's your epistemology? Are you a rationalist or an empiricist? All right, so this question has some terminology packed in there. Epistemology, study of knowledge. How do you think we know things? Rationalist refers to a school of knowledge which says that we have ideas inside ourselves from the moment of our beginning to exist, and that these ideas are innate, and that we don't actually get any new knowledge from sense experience of the world. Empiricist specifically refers to a school of modern philosophy which emerged around like the 17th century or so, which says that all of our knowledge comes from sense experience. In fact, and this is what I think makes, I'll get to this in a second, but this is what makes empiricism different from the view that I actually do hold. Empiricists say that our knowledge is just the same thing as our sense experience. And I've kind of let the cat out of the bag a bit here in what I'm going to talk about, but basically the view I accept actually predates both rationalism and empiricism. At this point, I'm pretty squarely set on the Aristotelian Thomist view of epistemology. I used to fiddle around a bit with Plato's view of knowledge back in the day. That would be more of a rationalist view. He says that we have innate ideas. He was kind of the founder of the innate idea theory. He said that we have these forms inside our head which correspond to the abstract world of forms, and that by sense experience, we don't actually understand anything new about the world. He has this whole dialogue where he really explores that idea. And I kind of toyed around with that idea when I was starting this channel, but by this point, all my objections to the Aristotelian view have been answered, and I'm pretty firmly convinced that our knowledge comes from sense experience, but is not the same thing as our sense experience, and that we receive knowledge through a process called abstraction. So if I took this book here, all right, and I look at this book has the form of bookness inside it. I look at this book, and my eyes take in the information, the sense data, and my mind forms a mental picture of what a book is. But that mental picture of book is not the same thing as the idea of book. What happens next is it's called an active intellect. My active intellect takes from that image of book the idea, the form, the concept of bookness, which is the actual idea of book. And that is like my knowledge of book, is the thing that my active intellect pulls away from that image of book that I formed inside my brain. I'll definitely be doing more about this in the future. It's a great question, but that's what I would say. I'm not a rationalist, not anymore, but I don't think you could really call me an empiricist either, because I don't believe that our sense experience is the same thing as our knowledge. I don't think the images we form in our minds from the data we take in, the colors that our eyes perceive, and the touch, the texture that our touch perceives, and the smells that our sense of smell perceives, I don't think that in itself constitutes knowledge. I think we have to do this extra step of abstracting our knowledge away from that sense information. And again, I'll be doing more about that in the future. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. It was a fun one for me. Let me know if you want to see more content like this in the future, more Q&A content. Feel free to put a comment below if you do. Also, feel free to put a comment below if you don't. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and God bless.